The last meeting of Earth's leaders ended with silence. Not the comfortable quiet of agreement, but the heavy stillness that comes when everyone knows they are about to die. Ambassador Lisa Chen walked slowly through the empty corridors of the United Nations building, her footsteps echoing against walls that had witnessed a century of human diplomacy. Today, those same walls had heard humanity's death sentence. The holographic message from the Galactic Council still burned in her memory. 3 alien species, each more advanced than Earth could ever hope to become, had delivered their ultimatum with cold precision. Humanity had exactly 1 solar cycle to prove they deserved to exist among the stars. The test was simple in its impossibility. Destroy the Void Nexus, a massive fortress that had been consuming entire star systems for over 2,000 years. Every military expert on Earth agreed it was suicide. The fortress existed in the space between 3 different alien territories, protected by the most powerful defensive systems ever created. Ships that approached it simply vanished, their final transmissions cut short by weapons that could tear apart matter at the atomic level. Even if a human vessel somehow survived the journey, the fortress itself was the size of Earth's moon and protected by energy shields that could deflect the combined firepower of entire fleets. David Reed knew all these facts as he sat in the small coffee shop near the spaceport, watching people go about their daily lives. They had no idea that their world might end tomorrow. The government had decided not to tell them, believing it was kinder to let them live their final days in peace. David disagreed, but he was just a cargo hauler who had volunteered for what everyone called the suicide mission. His ship, the Defiant Hope, was nothing special. Built 30 years ago for hauling mining equipment to the outer colonies, she was slow, ugly, and held together with spare parts and determination. Her crew, quarters could barely fit 30 people, and her weapon systems were designed for clearing asteroid debris, not fighting alien warships. If Earth's military had 100 better ships to send, they would have chosen any of them instead. But those better ships had better crews who wanted to live. David's volunteers were different. They were the ones who had nothing left to lose, or everything to prove. Tom Bradley had lost his family when the mining colony on Europa was attacked by space pirates. Amy Cross had been dishonorably discharged from the Navy for refusing to follow orders that would have killed innocent civilians. Dr. Michael Torres was dying of a rare disease that gave him 6 months to live. Each member of the crew had their own reasons for accepting a mission with no chance of return. The meeting at the spaceport was small and quiet. No cameras, no speeches, no fanfare. Just 30 humans saying goodbye to a world they would never see again. David looked at each face in turn, memorizing them. Tom with his calloused hands and gentle smile. Amy with her bright red hair and fierce determination. Michael with his kind eyes and the slight tremor in his hands that betrayed his illness. Rachel Stone, the best pilot in the outer colonies, who had volunteered because she said flying toward death was better than waiting for it to come to her. Bill Hayes, the former Marine sergeant, stood at attention, even though there were no officers present to salute. His scarred face showed no emotion, but David had seen him crying in his quarters the night before, looking at pictures of his daughter who would grow up without knowing what happened to her father. Dr. Anna White, the ship's medic, had quiet hands and a quieter voice, but she possessed a strength that made everyone feel safer just by being near her. These were Earth's champions, not the strongest or the smartest or the bravest, but the ones willing to die so that others might live. David felt the weight of that responsibility as he addressed them for the final time before departure. The spaceport was nearly empty at this hour. Most ships launched during the day when crowds could gather to see them off. The Defiant Hope would leave in darkness, carrying its cargo of hope and desperation toward a distant enemy that had never known defeat. Earth's government had given them the best equipment they could spare, but it still felt inadequate compared to the task ahead. As the crew made their final preparations, David received one last message from the Galactic Council. It was brief, and seemed almost mocking in its simplicity. The three alien species that protected the Void Nexus were called the Architects, the Ravagers, and the Watchers. The Architects built machines that could reshape reality itself. The Ravagers were warriors whose smallest soldiers were twice the size of humans and armed with weapons that could cut through spaceship hulls. The Watchers were psychic beings who could read thoughts and manipulate minds from across star systems. Any one of these species could have destroyed Earth without effort. Together they formed a defense that had never been broken. The message included tactical data that made David's heart sink even further. The fortress had destroyed over 300 attack fleets in the past millennium. Ships from dozens of different worlds had tried and failed to even damage its outer defenses. Earth's military strategists had calculated the odds with painful precision. Even if everything went perfectly, even if the crew somehow managed to reach the fortress and penetrate its defenses, the chance of actually destroying it was less than 1%. The chance of anyone surviving was so small that the computers couldn't calculate it accurately. David closed the message and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of human space, the Void Nexus waited like a cancer in the galaxy's heart. In 12 hours, the Defiant Hope would begin its journey toward that distant darkness. Earth's children would either return as heroes or die as martyrs, but they would not go quietly into extinction. The countdown had begun, and humanity's last hope rested in the hands of 30 volunteers who had already accepted their deaths. 3 weeks into their journey, the Defiant Hope drifted through space like a piece of cosmic debris. Her engines ran cold and silent, her hull scarred with artificial damage that Tom Bradley had carefully applied to make her look like a derelict vessel. The disguise was working better than anyone had dared hope. Twice, they had passed through patrol zones where alien sensors had scanned them and moved on, dismissing the battered cargo ship as harmless wreckage. David floated in the ship's cramped observation deck, watching the Void Nexus grow larger through the reinforced windows. Even from this distance, the fortress was terrifying to behold. It stretched across space like a mechanical mountain, its surface covered with weapons that could destroy cities and shield generators that shimmered with deadly energy. Around it, 3 different types of alien ships moved in careful patterns, each species maintaining its own territory while guarding the approaches to the fortress. The plan they had developed during the long journey was based on a simple truth that Earth's military experts had overlooked. The 3 Guardian species hated each other almost as much as they feared the Void Nexus. The Architects viewed the Ravagers as primitive brutes who solved every problem with violence. The Ravagers saw the Watchers as cowardly weaklings who hid behind psychic tricks instead of fighting with honor. The Watchers considered both other species to be inferior beings driven by base emotions instead of pure logic. Amy Cross had spent weeks studying their communication patterns, learning how each species coordinated with the others. The cooperation was minimal and grudging, held together only by their shared duty to protect the fortress. She had discovered something interesting in their transmissions. None of the 3 species wanted to be there. They guarded the Nexus because they had to, not because they chose to. This gave humanity its first advantage. While the aliens expected a direct military assault that they could repel with overwhelming force, the humans planned something completely different. They would use the Guardians' mutual distrust against them, slipping through the gaps in their coordination like water finding cracks in stone. Tom Bradley had worked miracles with the ship's systems, modifying them in ways that would have horrified any safety inspector. He had replaced the standard navigation computer with an ancient mechanical guidance system that used physical dials and switches instead of electronic circuits. The weapons had been stripped down to their most basic components, operated by manual, controls that required physical strength to aim and fire. Even the life support systems ran on backup power cells instead of the main reactor. The modifications made the ship incredibly difficult to operate, but they also made it nearly invisible to alien sensors. The architect's scanning technology looked for electronic signatures and energy patterns. The Ravager's detection systems were tuned to identify military-grade weapons and defensive systems. The Watcher's psychic abilities could sense complex thoughts and emotions, but they struggled to read minds that were focused on simple, mechanical tasks. Dr. Michael Torres had studied everything humanity knew about the three guardian species, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The architects were brilliant but inflexible, unable to adapt quickly when their careful plans were disrupted. The Ravagers were incredibly strong and aggressive, but they relied on intimidation and direct confrontation. The Watchers were powerful psychics, but their abilities weakened when they encountered minds that thought in ways they couldn't understand. Rachel Stone proved to be the key to their infiltration. As the Defiant Hope drifted closer to the fortress, she began flying in patterns that seemed random but were actually based on mathematical sequences that human children learned in school. The Fibonacci sequence, prime numbers, and geometric progressions guided their path through the defensive perimeter. To human minds, the patterns were obvious and comforting. To alien sensors, they looked like the natural drift of a powerless ship caught in gravitational fields. The first real test came when they entered the Architect's patrol zone. Sleek, crystalline ships surrounded them, their surfaces covered with scanning devices that could analyze matter down to the molecular level. Amy had prepared for this moment by filling the ship's hull with debris from Earth's history. Broken furniture, old clothing, damaged electronics, and even some rotting food created a sensor signature that looked exactly like what the architects expected from a derelict vessel. The scanning lasted for 6 hours. David and his crew floated, motionless in their hiding places, breathing through emergency oxygen masks to avoid creating heat signatures that might give them away. Tom had shut down everything except the most essential life support systems, leaving them in cold darkness while alien minds tried to determine if they posed any threat. When the architects finally moved on, convinced that the ship was nothing but space junk, the crew allowed themselves a moment of celebration. They had passed the first test, but 2 more awaited them. The Ravagers would be looking for weapons and warriors. The Watchers would be searching for hostile thoughts and hidden intentions. Bill Hayes had trained the crew for their encounter, with the Ravagers using techniques he had learned during urban warfare on Earth. The key was to think like prey instead of predators. When the massive Ravager warships approached, bristling with cannon and covered in armor plating that could shrug off nuclear weapons, the humans forced themselves to feel genuine fear and helplessness. Their terror was so authentic that it satisfied the Ravagers' expectations. These aliens were used to being the most dangerous things in any conflict. They saw the humans' fear and dismissed them as harmless victims. The Watchers proved to be the most challenging obstacle. Their ships were beautiful and terrible, constructed from materials that seemed to bend light around them. As they approached the Defiant Hope, the humans could feel alien minds pressing against their thoughts, searching for any sign of deception or hostile intent. Dr. Anna White had prepared them for this encounter in an unexpected way. Instead of trying to hide their thoughts or block the psychic probes, she had taught them to fill their minds with music. Each crew member focused on a different song from Earth's history, letting the melodies and rhythms wash through their consciousness. The combination of 30 different musical pieces created a mental symphony that confused and overwhelmed the Watchers' psychic abilities. The aliens had never encountered minds that could maintain such complex, layered thoughts while remaining calm and focused. The music created patterns that seemed almost mathematical to the watchers, but the emotions and memories attached to the songs were purely human in a way that the psychic beings couldn't understand. After several attempts to read their intentions, the watchers gave up and moved away, their alien minds frustrated by thoughts they couldn't translate. With all three guardian species convinced that the defiant hope was harmless debris, the humans were free to approach the void nexus itself. The fortress loomed before them like a mechanical moon, its surface covered with weapons that could sterilize planets and sensors that could detect a single atom of foreign matter. But Tom Bradley had one final trick prepared for their infiltration. Using mining equipment that was older than some of the crew members, he had built a boring device that worked on purely mechanical principles. Instead of energy beams or molecular disruptors, it used rotating diamond-tipped drills powered by compressed air. The technology was so primitive that the fortress's advanced sensors couldn't even detect it as a tool, much less a weapon. As the defiant hope drifted against the fortress's hull, Tom began the slow process of cutting through armor that had never been breached. The drilling was loud and crude, but it was also invisible to every scanning system the aliens had ever developed. Hours passed as the ancient human technology chewed through materials that could withstand the heat of stars and the pressure of black holes. Finally, the drill broke through into the fortress's interior. David looked at his crew one final time before they entered the breach. They had achieved the impossible by thinking like humans instead of trying to match alien technology with alien methods. Now came the real test. Inside the void nexus, they would discover whether their success had been worth the price they would inevitably pay. The interior of the void nexus defied every expectation the humans had formed during their approach. Instead of mechanical corridors filled with alien technology, they found themselves walking through what looked like a vast organic cathedral. The walls pulsed with a rhythm that reminded Dr. Michael Torres of a heartbeat, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with an energy that made their skin tingle and their thoughts feel strangely distant. Amy cross-checked her instruments repeatedly, unable to believe what they were telling her. The readings made no sense according to any physics she understood. The fortress appeared to be larger inside than outside, with spaces that folded back on themselves in ways that hurt to think about. Her communication equipment picked up signals that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, carrying voices that spoke in languages that had been dead for thousands of years. David led his crew deeper into the structure, following corridors that seemed to grow and shift around them. The walls were covered with symbols that changed when nobody was looking directly at them, and the floor beneath their feet felt warm and somehow alive. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows that moved independently of the people who should have created them. It was Rachel Stone who first realized what they were walking through. As a pilot, she was used to navigating by landmarks and reference points, but nothing in the fortress stayed constant long enough to serve as a guide. The architecture itself was fluid, responding to their presence in ways that suggested intelligence, rather than simple automation. She stopped walking and placed her hand against the nearest wall, feeling the pulse of energy that ran through the entire structure. The wall responded to her touch with colors that had no names in any human language. For a moment, Rachel felt her consciousness expand beyond her physical body, touching something vast and ancient that existed on the edge of her understanding. In that instant of contact, she saw the truth that the Galactic Council had hidden from humanity and perhaps from themselves. The Void Nexus was not a weapon or a fortress. It was a living being, a creature so large and complex that entire civilizations could exist within its body without ever realizing they were inside something. alive. The three guardian species were not protecting it from attack. They were part of it, absorbed into its consciousness eons ago when their own worlds had been consumed. Dr. Torres confirmed Rachel's discovery using medical equipment that had been designed to monitor human vital signs. When he pointed his sensors at the walls, they registered brain activity, neural networks, and circulatory systems on a scale that defied comprehension. The fortress was not just alive, it was thinking, and its thoughts were made up of the memories and experiences of every civilization it had ever consumed. The terrible truth became clear as they ventured deeper into the creature's body. The void nexus fed on entire worlds, absorbing not just their physical matter but their cultures, their histories, and the very essence of what made each species unique. It was a cosmic predator that had been hunting across the galaxy for millennia, growing larger and more powerful with every civilization it devoured. But the creature was not evil in any way that humans could understand. It genuinely believed that it was preserving the species it consumed, keeping their memories and achievements safe within its own consciousness. In its alien mind, death and absorption were acts of love, ways of ensuring that nothing valuable would ever be truly lost. The guardian species served it willingly because they had been convinced that their sacrifice had meaning and purpose. Amy discovered the first of the guardian species when her communication equipment began picking up transmissions from deeper within the fortress. The signals were weak and fragmented, but she recognized the mathematical patterns that indicated intelligent communication. Following the source of the transmissions, the crew found themselves in a vast chamber filled with crystalline structures that hummed with electronic activity. The architects were still there, or what remained of them. Their consciousness had been integrated into the fortress's computer systems, their thoughts translated into pure information that helped guide the creature's movements through space. They existed as living programs, their personalities intact, but their bodies long since absorbed into the organic machinery that surrounded them. When Amy managed to establish communication with them, their first words were a warning. They told her that the humans should flee before they too were consumed, but their warning came with an undertone of longing. The architects had been alone for so long that even the prospect of new minds to communicate with was worth the risk of seeing those minds destroyed. Bill Hayes found the Ravagers in what had once been the fortress's armory. They existed as pure warriors now, their consciousness merged with the weapon systems that defended the creature from external threats. Their bodies were gone, but their fighting spirit remained, channeled into the massive guns and energy shields that had destroyed so many attacking fleets. They spoke to Bill in the language of soldiers, recognizing him as a fellow warrior, even as they warned him that his battle was already lost. The Watchers were the most disturbing discovery. Dr. Anna White found them in a chamber that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their psychic abilities amplified by the creature's neural networks until they could observe events across the entire galaxy. They had become the fortress's senses, watching for new civilizations that might be suitable for consumption. Their minds had expanded beyond individual consciousness, becoming part of something larger and more terrible than any human could imagine. Each guardian species retained enough of their original identity to feel horror at what they had become, but they were also seduced by the power and knowledge that came with their integration into the creature's consciousness. They knew things that no single species could ever learn, had access to technologies and philosophies from thousands of different worlds. The price of that knowledge was their freedom, but many of them had convinced themselves that the trade was worthwhile. Dr. Torres made the discovery that changed everything when he found the creature's heart, a massive organ that pulsed with the combined life force of every civilization it had ever consumed. The heart was beautiful and terrible, a swirling mass of energy that contained the hopes and dreams of species that had been extinct for millennia. But it was also a prison, trapping the essence of those civilizations in an endless cycle of existence, without growth or change. The humans realized that destroying the fortress would not save the galaxy. If they succeeded in killing the creature, all of the stored life energy would be released at once, creating an explosion that could destroy entire star systems. The Guardian species were not protecting the fortress from attack, they were protecting the galaxy from the consequences of the fortress's destruction. But there was another possibility, one that none of the previous attackers had ever considered. Instead of destroying the creature, they could reverse its process, finding a way to separate the consumed civilizations from its consciousness and restore them to independent existence. The challenge was that such a process would require someone to enter the creature's neural core and manually control the separation from within. David looked at his crew as they stood before the entrance to the creature's brain, knowing that whoever entered would not survive the process. The energy required to reverse millennia of absorption would consume anyone who tried to control it. But for the first time since leaving Earth, he saw hope in their eyes. They had found a way to save not just humanity, but every species that had ever been consumed by the Void Nexus. The suicide mission had become something greater than anyone had imagined. They would still die, but their deaths could restore life to an entire galaxy. As they prepared for the final phase of their journey, the humans began to understand that their greatest weapon was not their technology or their courage, but their refusal to accept that any sacrifice was meaningless if it could help others survive. Something remarkable happened when the humans refused to see the Guardian species as enemies. For the first time in thousands of years, the architects, ravagers, and watchers experienced something they had almost forgotten: genuine curiosity about another intelligent species. The humans did not try to command them or dismiss them as obstacles to overcome. Instead, they approached each group with the simple desire to understand and communicate. Tom Bradley was the first to make a real connection. His engineering background helped him appreciate the elegant solutions that the architects had developed over their long existence within the fortress. When he examined their crystalline forms, he saw not alien monsters, but fellow builders who had been forced to work with materials and constraints that no human engineer had ever faced. He began asking them questions about their work, showing genuine interest in the mathematical principles they used to maintain the creature's vast internal systems. The architects responded with something approaching joy. They had been isolated for so long that they had almost forgotten what it felt like to share knowledge with minds that could appreciate their achievements. Through Amy's communication systems, they began teaching Tom about technologies that could reshape matter at the quantum level and energy systems that drew power directly from the fabric of space itself. But as they shared their knowledge, the architects also began to remember what they had lost. They recalled the pleasure of creating things that would outlast their creators, the satisfaction of solving problems that no one had ever solved before. The fortress had given them access to incredible power, but it had also taken away their ability to build something truly new. Everything they created was ultimately part of the creature's body, designed to serve its needs rather than express their own creativity. Bill Hayes found common ground with the Ravagers through the universal language of warrior respect. He did not try to prove that humans were stronger or more skilled in combat. Instead, he shared stories of human conflicts, describing battles where courage and honor mattered more than victory or survival. The Ravagers listened with growing fascination to tales of soldiers who sacrificed themselves to protect civilians, warriors who showed mercy to defeated enemies, and leaders who chose death rather than compromise their principles. The concept of fighting for something other than dominance was alien to the Ravagers, but it stirred memories of their own history that they had thought were lost forever. They began to recall warriors from their past who had shown similar nobility, heroes who had valued honor above their own lives. The fortress had made them into perfect weapons, but it had also stripped away the codes of conduct that had once given their warfare meaning. Dr. Anna White's connection with the Watchers proved to be the most profound and disturbing. When she opened her mind to their psychic contact, she experienced the full weight of their collective consciousness. For a terrifying moment, she felt her individual identity dissolving into the vast network of minds that made up the Watchers' shared existence. But instead of fighting against the experience, she embraced it with the compassion that had made her choose medicine as her life's work. The Watchers had never encountered a mind that could touch their collective consciousness without being consumed by it. Anna's thoughts remained distinct and individual, even as she shared their expanded awareness. More importantly, she brought with her something that the Watchers had lost in their transformation: the ability to feel genuine emotion about the suffering of others. Through Anna's connection, the Watchers began to see the consumed civilizations not as preserved treasures, but as trapped prisoners. They felt the pain of species that had been frozen in time for millennia, unable to grow or change or choose their own destinies. For the first time since their absorption into the fortress, the Watchers experienced regret for their role in maintaining the creatures' feeding cycles. As these connections deepened, the three guardian species began to communicate with each other in ways they had not done for centuries. The humans served as translators and mediators, helping them share insights and perspectives that had been isolated by mutual distrust. Tom helped the Ravagers understand the architect's love of elegant engineering solutions. Bill showed the architects how the Ravagers' warrior traditions created bonds of loyalty that transcended individual survival. Anna enabled the Watchers to share their expanded awareness with both other species without overwhelming their consciousness. Rachel Stone made the discovery that changed everything when she realized that the guardian species still retained their species' core technologies and abilities. The architects could still manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level. The Ravagers still possessed their incredible combat skills and tactical knowledge. The Watchers maintained their psychic abilities to observe and influence events across vast distances. The fortress had absorbed their bodies, but their essential capabilities remained intact. Working together, the four species developed a plan that none of them could have conceived alone. The architects would use their quantum manipulation abilities to create a resonance field that could separate individual consciousness from the creature's collective mind. The Ravagers would provide the tactical coordination needed to implement the plan simultaneously across the entire fortress. The Watchers would use their psychic abilities to guide each separated consciousness back to its original form and location in space. The humans would serve as the coordinators and controllers, using their natural ability to work with different species to manage the complex interactions required for success. But the plan required more than technical expertise and psychic power. It needed someone to enter the creature's neural core and manually control the separation process from within. Dr. Michael Torres volunteered immediately. His terminal illness made him the logical choice, since he would die anyway within months. But the other humans refused to let him sacrifice himself alone. They had come to understand that their greatest strength was not individual heroism, but their ability to work together as a unified team. David made the decision that would define humanity's legacy in the galaxy. All 30 humans would enter. the neural core together, combining their consciousness into a collective will that could guide the separation process while maintaining their individual identities. It was a technique that no other species had ever attempted, requiring a level of trust and cooperation that the galaxy had never seen. The Guardian species were amazed by the humans' willingness to die together rather than let any individual bear the burden alone. It was a concept that challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligent behavior. Most species would have chosen their most expendable member for the sacrifice, or competed to determine who deserved the honor of dying for the group. But humans approached death the same way they approached life, as a shared experience that was more meaningful when faced together. Their decision to enter the neural core as a unified group gave them the collective strength needed to resist being absorbed into the creature's consciousness, while retaining enough individual will to control the separation process. As they prepared for the final phase of their mission, the humans and the Guardian species worked together to modify the fortress's internal systems. Tom and the architects created quantum resonance chambers that could contain and direct the released life energy. Bill and the Ravagers planned the tactical sequence that would ensure the separation process occurred simultaneously throughout the creature's vast body. Anna and the Watchers established the psychic networks that would guide each consciousness back to its proper destination. The preparation took days, but finally everything was ready. The humans stood before the entrance to the neural core, knowing that once they entered, there would be no return. But they were no longer facing death as a defeat or even as a necessary sacrifice. They were embracing it as the ultimate expression of what made humanity unique in the galaxy: the willingness to give everything for the chance to help others find freedom. As David led his crew into the heart of the creature that had consumed 1,000 civilizations, he realized that they had already achieved something more valuable than their own survival. They had shown 3 ancient species that cooperation was possible, that different forms of intelligence could work together toward common goals. Whether their plan succeeded or failed, they had planted seeds of hope that would grow long after their own deaths. The neural core of the Void Nexus was beautiful in a way that defied description. Streams of pure thought flowed through crystalline channels like rivers of liquid light, carrying the dreams and memories of 1,000 dead civilizations. The 30 humans floated in the center of this cosmic brain, their bodies already beginning to dissolve as the creature's consciousness reached out to absorb them into its eternal collection. But instead of fighting the process or trying to shield their minds from integration, the humans did something that surprised even themselves. They opened their consciousness completely, allowing the creature to experience human thoughts and emotions for the first time in its ancient existence. The creature paused in its absorption, fascinated by minds that felt joy in simple things, like sunlight on water, that found meaning in temporary connections with others, that could choose hope even when facing certain death. David felt his individual identity beginning to blur at the edges, but he held on to his core purpose through the force of shared will. Around him, his crew members were experiencing the same dissolution, but their thoughts remained connected through bonds of friendship and trust that the creature could not understand. Where other species had been absorbed as isolated individuals, the humans maintained their unity even as they merged with the vast consciousness that surrounded them. Amy was the first to establish communication with the imprisoned civilizations. Her expertise with alien languages allowed her to recognize the patterns of thought that belonged to different species, even when those thoughts had been integrated into the creature's collective mind for millennia. She found the Builders, a species of artists who had created wonders that spanned entire solar systems before being consumed 5,000 years ago. She located the Singers, whose music had once carried messages between distant galaxies. One by one, she made contact with the fragments of consciousness that remained from each absorbed civilization. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had been silent for centuries suddenly found their voices, crying out with joy at the discovery that they still existed as distinct entities. The creature shuddered as its carefully organized consciousness was disrupted by the awakening of minds it had thought were fully integrated. For the first time in its existence, it experienced something approaching fear. Tom worked with the architects to create quantum resonance points throughout the creature's body, establishing anchor points where separated consciousness could gather before being projected back into space. The architects had never attempted to reverse their integration with the fortress, but Tom's human perspective allowed them to see possibilities they had missed. Together, they began building channels that could carry individual awareness away from the collective mind without destroying the consciousness in the process. Bill coordinated with the Ravagers to establish a tactical sequence for the separation process. The creature's immune systems were already responding to the disruption, sending waves of defensive energy that could destroy any consciousness that tried to leave the collective. The Ravagers used their warrior skills to create safe passages through the creature's defenses, fighting against the very systems they had helped to build during their centuries of service. Dr. Anna White formed the crucial link with the Watchers, using their expanded psychic abilities to guide each separated consciousness toward its proper destination. Some species needed to be restored to their original homeworlds. Others had to be given new planets where they could rebuild their civilizations. A few requested to be returned to the empty space between stars, where they could exist as pure energy beings without the need for physical form. The process was incredibly complex, requiring split-second timing and perfect coordination between 4 different species working together for the first time in galactic history. But as the separation began, something unexpected happened. The humans discovered that their consciousness was not being absorbed by the creature. Instead, their thoughts were serving as a bridge between the imprisoned civilizations and their freedom. Rachel Stone realized what was happening when she felt her awareness expanding to encompass the entire fortress. The humans were not just controlling the separation process, they were becoming the pathway through which each civilization could rediscover its individual identity. Their unique ability to form connections across species barriers had transformed them into a living network that could maintain unity while preserving diversity. Dr. Michael Torres felt his terminal illness being consumed by the creature's healing processes, but instead of allowing himself to be cured, he channeled that healing energy toward the awakening civilizations. His approaching death gave him a perspective that the immortal creature could not understand. He knew that life was precious precisely because it was temporary. That meaning came from the knowledge that every moment was irreplaceable. The creature fought against the separation with increasing desperation. It had spent millennia convincing itself that absorption was an act of love, that preserving other species within its own consciousness was the highest form of care. The humans were forcing it to confront the truth that it had been driven by loneliness and hunger rather than compassion. Its protests echoed through the neural core as streams of consciousness began flowing away from its collective mind. But the humans were dying in the process. Their bodies could not withstand the energy required to maintain the separation channels, and their consciousness was being stretched across distances that spanned the entire galaxy. One by one, they felt their individual identities beginning to fade as they became conduits for the liberation of entire civilizations. David made the final transmission to Earth as his own awareness dissolved into the cosmic network he had helped create. His voice reached across the stars, carrying words that would be remembered long after his death. He told the people of Earth that they had not failed in their mission, that they had discovered something more valuable than victory or survival. They had learned that true strength came from the willingness to sacrifice everything for the freedom of others. The separation process reached its climax as thousands of civilizations simultaneously rediscovered their individual existence. The creature's consciousness shattered like a crystal struck by lightning, releasing waves of pure life energy that rippled across the galaxy. Each liberated species carried with them the memories of their time within the collective, but they also retained their unique cultures and identities that had been preserved in the deepest layers of their consciousness. The Builders emerged. First, their artistic spirits blazing with renewed creativity as they remembered the joy of shaping matter into forms of impossible beauty. The singers followed, their voices joining in harmonies that had been silent for millennia. One by one, entire civilizations materialized in the space around the dissolving fortress, their ships and habitats reconstructed from the quantum patterns that the architects had learned to manipulate. The three guardian species found themselves free for the first time in centuries. The architects discovered that their integration with the fortress had taught them new ways to blend technology with organic systems. The Ravagers realized that their warrior traditions could be used to protect rather than conquer. The Watchers learned that their psychic abilities were stronger when used to connect minds rather than control them. But the cost of liberation was terrible to witness. The 30 humans were dying as their consciousness spread too thin across the vast network they had created. Their bodies floated in the neural core like fading stars, their life force being consumed by the energy required. To maintain the separation channels, each death sent ripples of sorrow through the liberated civilizations, species that had never known humanity, mourning for the people who had given everything to set them free. Amy Cross was the last to speak before her consciousness finally dispersed into the cosmic network. Her final words were not of sadness or regret, but of wonder at the beauty of what they had accomplished together. She had seen civilizations that had been dead for thousands of years return to life, watched species that had never met before reach out to help each other rebuild their shattered worlds. As the humans died, their consciousness did not disappear entirely. Instead, it became woven into the fabric of the galactic community they had helped create. Every species that had been liberated from the fortress carried within them a spark of human courage and compassion. The network of understanding that the humans had created lived on in the connections between different civilizations. The Void Nexus itself did not die, but it was transformed by the experience. The creature's hunger was replaced by a deep sadness for the pain it had caused, and its loneliness was healed by the knowledge that true connection came from cooperation rather than absorption. It chose to become a guardian of the galaxy, using its vast size and power to protect the civilizations it had once consumed. The news of humanity's sacrifice spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by the psychic networks that the Watchers had learned to use for communication rather than surveillance. Every species that heard the story was amazed by the concept of beings who would choose death over the survival of strangers they had never met. Earth received the news through a message sent by the combined voices of 1,000 grateful civilizations. The planet that had been facing extinction was suddenly invited to join a galactic community that spanned millions of worlds. But more than that, humanity was asked to serve as the moral center of this new alliance, to teach other species the values of cooperation and sacrifice that had made the liberation possible. The Galactic Council was dissolved and replaced with a new organization based on the principles that the humans had demonstrated. Instead of hierarchical control, the new alliance operated through consensus and mutual aid. Instead of competition for resources, member species shared their knowledge and abilities for the common good. Humanity's colonies spread across the galaxy not as conquerors but as teachers and mediators. Human diplomats helped resolve conflicts between species that had been enemies for millennia. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists to develop technologies that benefited everyone. Human artists collaborated with the builders to create wonders that celebrated the diversity of galactic civilization. The memorial to the crew of the Defiant Hope was built in the space where the Void Nexus had once floated. Instead of a traditional monument, it took the form of a living garden that existed in the vacuum between stars, sustained by technologies that every liberated species had contributed. The garden grew and changed constantly, reflecting the ongoing evolution of the galactic community that the humans had died to create. Children from 100 different worlds learned the story of the 30 humans who had chosen sacrifice over survival, cooperation over conflict. The tale became more than just history. It became a guide for how intelligent beings could choose to relate to each other across the vast distances and cultural differences that separated their species. Years passed, and the galaxy flourished under the new alliance. Wars became rare, solved through negotiation rather than violence. Scientific discoveries were shared freely, leading to advances that no single species could have achieved alone. Art and music flowed between worlds, creating a rich cultural tapestry that celebrated both diversity and unity. But the greatest monument to humanity's sacrifice was not built of stone or metal. It existed in the choices that billions of beings made every day to help others, to cooperate instead of compete, to choose hope over fear. The humans had planted seeds of compassion that grew into a forest of understanding that spanned the galaxy. The suicide mission that was meant to prove humanity's worth had instead proven something far more valuable. It had shown that true glory came not from victory in battle or technological achievement, but from the willingness to give everything for the freedom of others. The humans had died as they lived, together and unafraid, their legacy written not in conquest, but in the liberation of an entire galaxy. In the end, humanity achieved immortality not through extending their own lives, but by inspiring others to live with courage and compassion. Their story became the foundation myth of a new galactic civilization, a reminder that even the smallest species could change the universe if they were willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves.